Well, Kohn, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
That's an absolute pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, me too. So I came across your account on TikTok, your TikTok, girl underscore dad.
Yep.
And so you had a video go very viral. Is it like 10 million or 11 million at this point? It
It's
went nuts.
a million at this point.
How many?
A little over 11 million views.
Isn't that amazing? Oh my God. That is so cool. And I think it really struck a chord. I mean, you're somebody who speaks from the heart, and the language of the heart is something that crosses all boundaries, in my
Ab-
experience. And I think it just struck a nerve because there are so many of us who are really trying to really figure out, like, why do we self-sabotage? Why don't we do the things that we know we could do, right? Like, if someone's on a weight loss journey, everybody knows it's about eating right and exercising and sleeping well and drinking water, like taking care of your body. We all know what to do, but there's like a resistance there. We just don't do it. And I really feel like this work, I'm holding up for those listening on the podcast, I'm holding up a journal. It's called the Shadow Work Journal, a guide to integrate and transcend your shadows. I really feel like this could be the key because I think that, we have parts inside of ourselves that try to keep us safe, but they do it in a dysfunctional way. Is that fair?
that's very fair and very accurate. And a lot of those things they develop into behavior patterns and thought patterns out of our past experiences.
Yeah.
And really, as you so stated, what the Shadow Work Journal really does is it gives you a guide through a process by which you can identify those things and
Right.
then connect to the behavior or the thought patterns that come out of those experiences that aren't serving your best interest, and then how to work through that so that you can rewrite some of those behavioral thought patterns.
And therefore take different actions and have different experiences. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, I want to define some terms, but before we get to that, I'd love to hear your story. Like, how did we get here? I know you had some tremendously challenging experiences. You lost your son a couple years ago. He was only 16. I'm so sorry for your loss. Um, can you just tell me a little bit about like how you discovered the shadow work journal and kind of how we got here?
Yeah, absolutely. The irony of my TikTok journey started as I was grieving the loss of my son. So one of the things that I've learned throughout my life and just being on a healing journey for the last 20 odd years is something that I put into practice whenever I need, I find a way to give. So what I needed in the moment of going through grief was that support and that uplifting and just that additional love. But
Yeah.
through my experience of understanding healing and understanding service, I knew that if I can give my gift of wisdom and my gift of uplifting people, if I could do that in the way that I've known myself to do it, that would also help me because the energy that I'm putting out there is often the energy that's going to come back to me. So when I first got on TikTok, it was within months after my son passed. And it was me kind of celebrating the joys of fatherhood with my daughter, but also finding these moments to share wisdom and share knowledge, and just really pour love and light into people. And as I started doing that, exactly what I anticipated was what happened. People started pulling love and light back into me. And as I would tell my story of losing my son in those tough days, I'd get on TikTok and maybe make a post to share that. And so many people would get in the comments and just reach out to me, and they became that support system. So I continue to do that on TikTok, celebrating the joys of fatherhood and just pouring life, love, and wisdom into people. And that's something that I've done for years now. So when I came across the Shadow Work Journal on TikTok, I ordered the journal for myself. And once I received the journal, I realized this is the work that I've been doing for myself and with other people. Just we didn't have this outlined guide step by step on how to do so. So I reached out to the author of the journal, and I let her know, hey, this is what I do. This is what I've been doing on TikTok. This is what I would love to do with this journal. And she was all aboard with it. She understood what it was that I was trying to do and accomplish with the journal. She gave me her go ahead and her blessings. And then we had the opportunity with the TikTok shop. And that's how we really started using the shadow work journal to do what I've been doing for the last 2.5 years on TikTok, which is pouring life, love, and wisdom into people at a time when I needed it the most.
That is so beautiful. And I just want to give you a little opportunity. I would love to hear about your son. I interviewed somebody recently who lost their daughter, and I heard a woman say, she's speaking about the loss of her daughter. She was like, my daughter was more than what happened to her. And that
Mm,
really struck me as profound, right? Because we these people that we loved were amazing, and there's so much complexity to them. And I just wondered, do you want to share a little bit about your son, like what
yeah.
kind of person he was,
So,
how much you loved him?
so Cassius is and was an amazing kid. The process of my life story is, as a troubled youth myself, I was engaged in being out in the streets and using drugs and all of those things. And when I had Cassius, he became my reason to strive for more. He
Mm.
became my reason to change my life, turn my life around, because I knew this kid needs me in order for him to survive in this world. So, that was the catalyst for me to make the change in my life and really start pursuing positive outcomes and really going after the things, my dreams and my aspirations. And he had always been that throughout my life. And then at the age of 16, through some unfortunate events, he was actually murdered in DC. And
Oh,
when that happened to Cassius, I had an opportunity. I had an opportunity to either allow this loss to become one of the greatest handicaps in my own process and development, or I had an opportunity to take this moment and say, I'm going to, one, establish a legacy that will be what he's remembered by, is what I can accomplish, right? So rather than people looking at my life and going, man, he lost his son and then his life went for the worse. I made a decision that people will look at my life, and the way that they will see his legacy and know of his legacy is the great things that I can accomplish with my life and of being of service to other people. So even now, in speaking about Cassius, part of the reason I'm here is because I've made that choice to do something
mm,
powerful, something impactful with my life after losing him, which now
yeah.
always gives me an opportunity to highlight who he is and what his life stands for.
Oh, that is so well said. It's so interesting. I lost my mom a couple years ago, and I had a period of time where I just couldn't function, and it just amazes me how some people, like, I had to just step out of life for a little while. I was still able to do the podcast. I'm not sure. I think maybe it just had its own momentum, but I needed to, like, kind of check out of life for a little while. And I'm just so interested to know. So did you have periods of time where you just needed to be alone and sort of insulate and grieve and private, or was your process, I mean, was it a little bit of both?
So it, I went through the same thing, right? I think there's a part of the process that took place after losing Cassius that I don't highlight a lot because people kind of see the man that came out on the other end. But there was
Right.
a portion there for the first 3 to 4 months where I was lost
Yeah.
and I was in heavy pain and heavy grief. And for a moment there, I started reverting back to those old worldly comforts of things that would help me to go through that process. And it really took me going through an unfortunate event where a friend said to me, hey, you need to get some professional help. You
Yeah.
need to get someone that you can talk to, someone that you can work through this process with. Because after losing Cassius, I didn't seek any grief therapy or any of those things. My initial response was kind of what everyone expected of me. I've always been the strong one. I've always
Mhm.
been people came to for wisdom, for some type of encouragement. So when this happened to me, many people in my life didn't know how to show up, right? Because they were so used to me being the guy that showed up for them. So for a period of time there, it was hard for me because the people that I would lean on didn't know how to be a support system to me. But then I had that friend say to me, you know, I know that you're this guy for everyone else, but you need someone to be there for you in that way. And it may need to be someone that you can professionally speak to. So once I started therapy after that was suggested to me, I had an amazing therapist who really saw what my gift was and knew my history in working with people and
Mhm.
kind of allowed me and her to just talk through this thing together. And I was able to really speak a lot of the things that I was experiencing, and she would give me that feedback. And that was a part of the process of right when I started TikTok and realized, you know, this is a moment. This is a moment that I can take this moment and impact so many other people's lives and just be a catalyst for change for so many people and let this be my momentum, let this be my driving force. And I decided to go that route.
Isn't it interesting that I'm a giver too, and I'm an encourager. And when you're in that role, like people like we all assume these roles, right? Like I'm the giver, they're the receiver. And when we're in pain, the receiver doesn't know how to be the giver, or they just expect that you know how to handle it, or you have other people. And the truth is, we not necessarily, like, maybe we've developed a good support system, and sometimes we don't. And I think it's so interesting that people don't know how to be. What was did you have other so somebody said go get therapy. Were there other people who are able to just like hold space for you and encourage you?
You know, two things. So you're absolutely right. And for me, I went through a process of expecting people to show up a certain way,
Mhm.
and they didn't. I also had to do a self assessment and say to myself, you know, the reason why people are not here, it's not because they don't want to be, it's because they don't know how to be.
Right.
So I had to make peace with that, right? To
Mhm.
recognize that it wasn't that people just weren't willing to reciprocate what I've always given. They
Right.
just didn't know how to be for someone that has always been their support system. But
Right.
the thing is, and it goes kind of the full circle of how we even ended up here with the shadow work journal. TikTok became where I would hold spaces for other people, but then they would also hold space for me. Right. And they saw those moments where it was a rough day. And rather than me being the one that was given encouragement, whether it was on my lives or the different videos, it was people reaching out to me and saying, hey, you know, I saw you live earlier. Looks like you're having a rough day. I just want to let you know that you'll make it through. Right. And TikTok became that place for me and it became that space for me. And I did have a few other people in my life that weren't immediately in my life, that weren't the recipients of that gift that I've always given, that were willing to be that for me, right? People that would just call me and kind of counsel me over the phone and just have those long conversations and sharing their own experiences. So I did have that, but it was challenging going through those initial periods of looking for people to be there, but then recognizing that they just don't know how to be there because you're always the one that's there for them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. It's, tough to wrestle with expectations.
That
You know, it's like, hey, what about me? And then you were talking about the process of with a therapist. I think what's so interesting is we can intellectually be aware of the process, like, oh, we need to share how we feel. We need validation and encourage, like, and because we're so used to being in the other role, right? Um, and then thinking like when we need help, it's like, oh, I already know what the process is, but knowing the process is very different than walking through, like going through the motions.
absolutely, absolutely. And what I found was as much as I knew the process, when you're in the other seat, it's like when we're working with people, right? There are things that a person will say that gives you insight that they had no clue they just revealed. And I
Right.
think that's what my experience was, where my therapist understood that, hey, I know you're already doing this work. I know you've done it for a long time. So we're just going to talk. right? And it was through those conversations that once we kind of reached the stop point, she would say, hey, I heard you say this, and I just want to give you some insight there. And I was like, I didn't think about that. I appreciate that. And that's really how we work through it, where she really took an approach where we're going to speak, and I'm just going to allow you to work yourself through the parts that you know.
Right.
And then I see those gray areas that you don't see. I'll take a moment to highlight them to you, and then we'll work through those. So
Yeah. We all have blind spots,
that's what it is. Yeah.
especially when we're grieving. I feel like when we're sort of emotionally hijacked, like I lose all perspective and I can't remember what I know.
Mm, that's
And
really good.
right. And so I think that's why it's so important for us to um, be with some, like we all, not just those of us that are givers or coaches or, um, the main support system, but to also be vulnerable and open and allow somebody else to be present for us as we sort of process out loud.
No, that's it. And you hit something just now with when we're in that heightened state of emotions, how it limits our ability to see everything. One of the things that I teach is your emotions are designed to give you information and not directions.
Oh, information, not direction. So where does the direction come from?
So what happens sometimes is when we haven't learned how to regulate our emotions or even be in tune with our emotions, we will feel a thing and then take actions just simply based on the feeling without assessment, right? So the
So good.
information, and you're supposed to take that information, make an assessment, and then act. Where too often, those of us that have been through trauma or we haven't really learned emotional regulation, we feel an emotion and attach ourselves to it and act on the emotion. And that's the directions. That's not what your emotions are designed to do. They're designed to give you information. And then you take that information, make an assessment, and then you choose to act.
That makes okay, emotion, information, then assessment. And it seems like it would be a good idea to wait for the emotion to calm down because we've all seen it, we've all done it where you get angry and we're like, never again, am I ever gonna? We try to make these sweeping decisions about have you ever heard of that? Like when setting boundaries, it's like we go from doormat to dictator. It's like I take it and I take it and I take it, and finally one day I've had enough, and I'm like, this is the way it's gonna be from now on. Totally
Absolutely
unreasonable, but that's a decision off of emotion, not assessment.
correct. Correct.
I see. I see it. That's a yeah, and so this is the thing like with the self-help junkie podcast is there's we don't have a lack of information, but it's applying the information. And what I've noticed is sometimes I get that dopamine hit of an insight, but then my behavior doesn't change. Right. So I feel like there's a disconnect between having the information and then a change in behavior. And that's where the shadow work journal comes in.
You that was a great segue because that's exactly what that's exactly how I present the journal to people as I'm giving them this as a tool, which is we all know the information, but there's something in our operating system, especially in the way that we respond to trauma. Some of these things that are now in our behavior patterns and our thought patterns have been embedded in our subconscious mind. And even though I may give you something that is right here in your conscious mind, your actions are still more dictated by what's in your subconscious mind. So that's why we go through this thing is I know better, but I struggle to do what I know. Well, that's because the information that's in your operating system, in your subconscious mind, has more power than the information that I'm putting right in front of you. And if you aren't able to really recognize those behavior patterns that don't serve you and then track them back to what is this? Where did this come from? Where did this start? Once you can identify, hey, I see that I'm always self-sabotaging because I have developed a sense of fear of letting people down, letting myself down, a fear of failure. And I was explaining this to people yesterday on my live. So what happens is, for those of us that have developed this sense of, I don't want to disappoint anyone, or I don't want to let people down, or I don't want to be the failure that I've been told that I am, we will sometimes self-sabotage a thing, because if I can control the explosion, then I can deal with what the failure part is right here, because I initiated it right here. But if I allow this to go, and if I follow this opportunity or wherever this may lead me, my fear of it not working out and me not being able to deal with it at a time when I'm not prepared, I'd rather deal with the immediate sense of, hey, this didn't work because I sabotaged it, than to actually put my faith or put my heart and my mind on the line for the potential failure later on. So we kind of go through these processes, and what this journal allows you to do is really kind of track back. Why do I do these things? And once I can identify the core of what this is, then the work is reframing it. And one of the things that I tell people is, you want to approach your past experiences with the knowledge that you have today. And you said something key earlier. You said expectations when we were talking about disappointment. And
Mhm.
here's one example that I always use that most people can relate to, especially if you've had childhood trauma. The reason we are so hurt and disappointed in the people that raised us, our parents or whomever, in the way that they failed us, is because as a child, we had an expectation of how they were supposed to love us and how they were supposed to treat us. And as a child, that expectation is valid. But if you look back with the knowledge that you have of today, and you look at, say, your parents, and just look at them for who they are with what you understand today, you will find instantly that those expectations that you had as a kid were valid as a kid, but in reality, you expected things of people that were not capable because of their own trauma, because of what they didn't understand, because of information that they didn't have. They weren't capable of meeting the expectations that you had of them as a child. So now that you're able to recognize that, a lot of that disappointment and that hurt, you can mitigate. You can understand that it wasn't me. It wasn't that they hated me. It wasn't something that I did, or it wasn't because of how they perceived me. Knowing the information that I know today, they were not capable. So now I can understand how to nurture that younger me who had that expectation and then felt that disappointment. I can say to younger me, hey, it wasn't you. They didn't hate you. It wasn't anything about you that made them treat you this way. It was their own trauma. It was the fact that they didn't have information, or it was the fact that they were dealing with poverty, or whatever it is. And by having that perspective and being able to reframe those experiences, you're now able to pull yourself from that emotional depth of pain and hurt and say, you know what? I don't have to feel that, because my expectations can now be adjusted, because I can look at the people that I had those expectations of and realize they weren't capable.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Where I get kind of hung up sometimes is the expectations versus a need. And it came up for me when I was looking, when you were I was listening to one of your videos and you were talking about all the wounds, and I was all check, check, check. So the abandonment wound, guilt, trust, and neglect. I was like, yeah, all of that,
Yep.
all of that. Like, and it's like the abandonment wound feels left out. Uh, Codependent, threatens to leave. Like, oh my gosh, I was the queen of storming out during an argument. I'm half Mexican, so I'd also break things. I don't know if that's just specific.
No,
I was, I was talking to my boys with my husband. My husband is the one who taught me how to communicate. He's like, nobody's leaving until we talk it all the way out till we get to peace. And I was like, you mean break things first and storm out, right? And he's like, no, no. And yeah, so he's the one who taught me how to communicate. It was really uncomfortable. But I realized that that was an abandonment. So I'm all over the place, but coming back to expectation versus a need. And I don't know that I was really aware that I had an expectation. I had a need to be like heard, seen, heard, and understood is kind of how I was, what was missing for me when I was little. And it felt like abandonment. It felt like neglect. It felt like I couldn't trust the adults around me. And I've been doing this kind of work for a long time, but I still find myself in certain situations where I'm not consistent about like content creation, or I'm not consistent about marketing, and things like that. And I'm like, why don't I want to do that when I do the work? It always tracks back to there's still that. And you were talking about inner child work, and I suspect that that's the work, right? There's a difference between the insight and doing the work. But like having an expectation almost, I'll just say it feels like a little blamey. Like, I guess because I feel so guilty all the time, anything that feels like a little like, oh, you're doing it wrong. It feels like a little.
That's good. That's good. But and here's the way that I would frame that as well, right?
Okay.
Why I say it comes from an expectation, valid expectations as children.
It's valid.
It is valid. And
Okay.
here's why it's an expectation, but in order to kind of compare it, there are other adults in our lives as children that may have done similar things, but they didn't have the same impact on us. Why? Because as our parents, we expected them to give us that. We expected them to see us. We expected them to hear us. We expected them to love on us compared to other people that may have just been adults that were around. If they didn't hear us, we didn't feel that trauma. If
Right.
they didn't see us, we didn't feel that trauma because we didn't expect that from them. But because these are our parents, we had a sense of, no, you're supposed to give me this, which it was valid. But the part where you kind of revisit that with the knowledge that you have of today is when you look back at your upbringing. One of the things that I always say to people, whenever you go back and visit experiences that you've had, don't go back and sit in the shoes that you were in the initial experience. Just go back as an observer. And what that means is, say if you imagine a scenario where you may have been yelled at by your parents as a child, and that experience really traumatized you. So when you go back to that memory, don't go back in the place of the child that you were. Go back as an observer and just kind of stand off and watch what's happening.
Mm.
And then do an assessment of what you know now, apply that assessment to your parents. So for instance, why were they yelling? Right now, when you go back and revisit those memories, you can do that assessment if you don't put yourself in the shoes that you were in at the time that the incident happened. And what happens once you start doing this assessment? Well, why were they so angry that, for example, if for many people that grew up in poverty, there's this thing about, eating up all the food. And
Right.
part of that is because as a parent, there's this fear that I won't have enough to feed my children or feed my family for the rest of the week. So the kids aren't allowed to just eat up everything.
Oh, right.
As a kid growing up in those environments, you don't really understand the depth of having to pay bills and being fearful that if you ate everything today, I won't be able to feed you all for another 2 weeks because that's how my money flow happens. So if you had those type of experiences and you go back to that memory and you just go as an observer and you say, well, why were mom and dad yelling about me going in the refrigerator? We had limited income. It wasn't because I was doing something wrong. It wasn't because they just hated to see me eat. It was because they were living out of fear. The fear that if we ate up all the food, they wouldn't be able to feed us for the next 14 days. I understand that now. Now that traumatic experience, because you're able to reframe it and look at it differently, the emotions that were attached to that, now when you think back of that emotion, what used to trigger you doesn't trigger you anymore because you have a better understanding and you're able to reframe that experience. And that's kind of some of the things that you learn in the process of shadow work is, everything that happened in the moment that it happened may not have been exactly what you experienced. And
Mm-hmm, hmm.
go back and kind of look at it from an observer's point of view and then do an assessment with the knowledge you have today. A lot of those emotions that are attached to those memories, you can reframe and reshape and then come out of those memories, or at least integrate those parts of yourself in a better and more healthier way.
That makes a lot of sense. And as you were talking about that, um, I know we go through exercises in the journal. But I was like, oh, I feel like I almost didn't want to write in the journal. I almost wanted to write on a separate piece of paper. Maybe I'll do that later, but I just decided to write in the book. Um, because I could see, because when people talk about doing the work, like going back, when you think about it, I'm like, well, how does one actually physically do that? Do you sit down and meditate? Do you write about it? Like, so I would imagine the journal is the process, right? And that we can use these exercises over and over again, like just writing out in a notebook.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I recommend to everyone. Get
Oh,
yourself
yeah.
a notebook with blank pages in it, and don't feel limited to what you're writing, because
Yeah.
sometimes your answer may be 2 paragraphs,
Yeah.
and you want to be able to have that honest expression of what comes up, because it's through that honest expression of what comes up that you're actually shining light to the shadow, or to those areas that are repressed, or those areas that are hidden. So yeah, I absolutely recommend getting a separate notebook and then writing through it, right? And if you go through an activity and nothing comes up, I also say to people, doing this work and using this journal is not like the trauma Olympics. It's not like, hey, I must have experienced every trauma in order for me to work through this. There are going to be some activities that don't resonate with you, that you didn't have those experiences, and that's okay. And what I also find is that there's some activities that people are just not ready to go there yet. And
I was
that's
I was wondering about that. I was because the work I do with people, sometimes people don't even know what their pain is. It's so true. Like part of a coping mechanism of trauma is dissociation. It's designed to protect us, but that dissociation kind of creates like this, like a toxic waste in a barrel inside our brain or in our body, and we may feel like it doesn't bother us because it's all locked away, but it leaches out. It comes out in unexpected ways, and then we're dumbfounded. We're like, why am I doing this? And I believe that it's because we've so disassociated from our pain that we don't recognize where it's coming from, and but it's still in there. It's still
that's
affecting us.
that's beautiful, right? And the way that I break it down to people is I use this analogy about the computer. So what happens is those things that you would disassociate yourself with, they go in your subconscious,
Right.
and everything that you're dealing with every day that is in your conscious mind, I call that your desktop. So the files that you keep on your desktop are the files that you deal with every day. You see them every day. You need them every day. So you just store them on your desktop. The things that you would disassociate, those memories, you put them on your hard drive. Time you turn your computer on, all of those files are at work and they're being used by your operating system. The difference is the files on your desktop, you're aware of those and you're
Yeah.
aware of how they're impacting the operating system. But the files on the hard drive, you're not aware of, but they are also impacting your operating system. And again, that's why the shadow work is so important, because most people say things like, hey, I'm afraid of what's going to come up. And I say to them, that's understandable, but I want you to consider you would rather live with the results of whatever that is that you're afraid of because it's impacting your life. You
Hmm.
would rather live with it unknowingly, or would you rather know, deal with, process, and be better from those things? And that usually gives people a good perspective of, just because you're not dealing with it doesn't mean it's not impacting your life. And more than likely, it's having an impact in your life in a way that is not serving your long-term best interest.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of the encouragement I want to offer is like you're not doing it alone. Right. That's the whole point of a support group or a community is that, yeah, we're going to look at some scary stuff, but we're not going to, it's not alone. Like
Yeah.
we're not going to we're not going to open this can of worms and just be like, good luck with that. We
And then
support each other.
the lives on Sundays is so that one, there's a community of us, right? And oftentimes the very first thing people start saying in the comments, oh my God, I thought I was the only one that been through that. Well, I thought I was the only one that's experiencing that. And once you know, like, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. We've all gone through some form of trauma and it's playing out in all of our lives in a certain way. But guess what? There's a community of us here. There's a support system here. We're following each other. We're reaching out to each other. I'm going to be here to give that additional guidance, and I'm also here to tell you that there is a better, brighter, more heightened you on the other side of this work. So the fear of coming into it, that's normal. But for someone that's been through it and so many other people that are a part of our lives and a part of our conversation that share their experiences, it gets the newcomers to know, hey, it seems scary, but you're gonna make it through it. And the you that evolves on the other end, it's worth doing it because so many of us have.
I think the other thing that's a great benefit about doing it as a community is when I'm dissociated from something and I'm like, this doesn't feel like it applies to me. When I hear how other people are like their stuff is up and they're in touch with it, and then they share about it, I go, it kind of like spurs ideas in my own mind. It like triggers memories. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, yeah, that does relate to me. And so like when my brain is like shut down and I'm numb and I'm like, oh, that's not about me, or that doesn't resonate, then I hear somebody talk about it and then I go, oh, like sometimes I just need an example.
No, and that's perfect. So what normally happens on Sunday is, and I tell everyone, we're not going to actually do the activities here on live, as in I'm expecting everyone to do it while I'm actually hosting the live. But what I do is I kind of just give some guidance, especially for the fill in the blank activities. And then sometimes to trigger those thoughts, I'll share what I put there in those blanks when I did this particular fill in the blank exercise.
Okay.
And I'll kind of give some of that insight in talking about my experience and talk about how I had to go and address that. And it does exactly that. It helps people to go, oh, okay, I kind of see where where this may apply or where this could have been something that I've experienced. And it triggers that thought in them to really understand how to do that particular activity.
Yeah, it connects the dots for me in a way that like I didn't get it, and then I see somebody do it and I go, oh, okay, that makes sense. I actually had a question for you. So I was doing I got stuck and I was like, well, I'm going to talk to Kohn anyway. So I'm just going to be like, I'm stuck. So part 3, there's a fill in the blank exercise, and then
Mhm.
there's reflection questions. And so I'm just going to, I'm just going to put it all out there and tell you what it says.
Let's
So,
go.
yeah. So the prompt was blank scares me the most. And so I was like, well, humiliation and rejection, those things scare me the most. And I was like, is this the most? But then in the beginning of the book, it says, don't overthink it. Just put down the first thing that comes up. So the first thing that came up for me was humiliation and rejection scares me the most. And then it says, when I become scared or anxious, I tend to blank. And I put isolate and play small. So I'll Netflix binge, I'll scroll on TikTok, I just check out. I totally check out. Um, and then it says it sometimes sucks because blank. And I wrote in I need and love people and I want to belong. Like I'm looking for a place of belonging. And this makes me feel blank. And I put sad and frustrated because there's a part of me that just wants to curl up in my little cocoon and zone out on Netflix or TikTok. But really, what I'm craving is connection and purpose and meaning and feeling like I have something to contribute. So when I'm in that isolated place, it just makes me sad and frustrated.
Mhm.
It says my anxiety teaches me that blank. And I was like, what is my anxiety teaching me? And I don't really know if this is, I know there's probably no right or wrong, but I was like, I need to feel safe and blank. I put reminds me of self-compassion. I understand that I'm human, but I love myself unconditionally. So I was like, okay, that was, yeah, that was really helpful for me to kind of go through that exercise. And one of the reflection questions, this is where I got stuck. It says, if my fears and anxieties were teachers, what lessons would they teach me? And I was like, I don't know, because I don't want to be isolated, right? I don't want to be shut down. I want to be connected and I want to be expressing myself without fear, I guess. But how did, I don't know, what insights do you have about what are my fears and anxieties trying to teach me?
So as you were speaking, I actually went back to my notes that I had for when we did this section on one of the Sundays.
Part 3, yeah.
Yeah, so I have my notes, and for that one, this is where we had the conversation where I went into depth about how your emotions are designed to give you information and not
Right,
that.
right.
So even your anxiety is giving you information about something that is unsettling, either that you're not seeing right here because you're unaware of where that unsettling emotion is rooted, but the anxiety is telling you that. So here's some of the notes that I took for that. Your emotions are designed to give you information, not directions. When we've experienced trauma, the need to protect ourselves from repeating the trauma again causes us to be hypersensitive to our emotion, and we act on them instead of receiving information from them. And then the third thing I wrote was fear and anxiety as teachers speak to you about your subconscious. They're telling you what is beneath the surface that you should and need to address. So essentially, you think about um, if you think about what is it that I'm fearful about, or what is it that I'm anxious about, right? So that's something that we don't often do with ourselves. We'll feel the emotion and we don't do the assessment, right?
Mhm.
We'll feel
Yeah.
the emotion, attach ourselves to the emotion, and then start acting on the emotion rather than saying, what is it that I'm being fearful about? What is it that I'm anxious about? And if you can answer those questions and then just start backtracking as if this is just information that's been presented to you, now you have to do a little bit of work with this information. If you're doing that honestly, the things that come up are really what you need to be addressing and not the emotion, right? The emotion is stemming from something. Oftentimes, it's to your point, I'm anxious because I don't want to be humiliated. So
Yeah,
I'll give you,
correct.
it's funny, those are some of your answers. When I did this activity, had similar answers.
Mm.
So when I would become anxious, even as a public speaker, there was always this first 5 to 10 minutes whenever I would go into a speaking engagement where I'll sweat profusely. I, like I can be as confident as I am about the information, and I know what I'm going to talk about, and I'm just going to speak from my heart. So I know it's nothing wrong with what I'm going to say, but my body has this preparation thing that it does where it's just like it gets really amped and prepared for everything.
Yeah.
I had to ask myself was, what am I anxious about? The fear was being humiliated
Mhm.
and actually failing. So then I had to ask myself, well, if I'm confident about what I'm about to do, why am I afraid of being humiliated or failing? Okay, this is rooted in being told that I'd be a failure for most of my childhood. It developed in me this sense of I'm never going to fail at anything. And sometimes what happens is we get some of those character traits that help us to be successful adults. So we don't think we need to do the work. So, example, because I was given this sense of you're not going to be enough or you aren't enough, it developed in me this drive that no matter where you put me, I refuse to fail. I refuse to be outworked. I refuse to, I'm just going to go so hard that I'm going to be successful at it. Now, that's something positive that has served me as an adult. But I also recognize out of that place also comes a fear of the failure, a fear of being what they told me I would always be. So I had to really look at that emotion and look at that place in my life and say, hey, you don't have to be afraid anymore. Look at what you've been able to accomplish. Look at how far you've come. These things that you're doing, even if you put yourself out there and it doesn't work out, guess what? That does not make you a failure. It just means you were willing to try. You were willing to go out there and put your best foot forward. So that's the work right there, right? That kind of tracking back. And again, it goes back to if you see your emotions as information providers,
Mhm.
you then have a better relationship with how to read, assess, and regulate your emotions. Because now when you feel anxious, you can ask yourself, what am I anxious about? If I know what I'm about to accomplish here, why do I feel this? Okay, where does this emotion come from? Through that assessment, you're either going to recognize there's something in your subconscious mind that you're just not at peace with, or you're going to recognize this is rooted in something that I've experienced in my past that I need to reframe and address. And that's a part of the work that we kind of teach and help people to work through.
Does that mean that once you started doing that, like, do you still sweat profusely before you speak and that's just okay? And you just go back, you go and you just kind of have that little conversation with yourself and then you calm down? Or do you
So no,
still?
now when I go into it, because I've been going through that process for a long time,
Ah,
it doesn't come as it used to, right? So I may feel that little sense of nervousness, but then I go, hey man, you got this. We're
okay.
go out here and pour some love, some light, and some wisdom on some people. But in the beginning, when I first started to recognize, hey, what is this? Why do I feel this way? Why am I physically
Yeah.
responding this way when mentally I'm fine and I'm confident, right? And
Yes.
one of the things I also tell people is if you've been functioning a certain way for so many years of your life, you're not just going to change that behavior overnight. So part of that work is you being dedicated to recognizing every time you're doing a thing and being conscious enough to do the work, the response, the calling it out, the assessment, the asking yourself, what is this? Doing that consistently enough so that you can change that behavior. Using the analogy of the computer hard drive again, that's a file that's been stored on your hard drive for 10, 15, 20 years,
Mhm.
right? Your operating system is used to, whenever you need to do a thing, tapping into that file. So, in order to change that behavior or to change that thought pattern, you have to be consistent. Every time that file opens and may give you a negative thought or a negative idea, you have to deposit the positive thought, the positive idea into that file. Over time, whenever you're going through a situation and that file is triggered as a part of your operating system, when it opens, what comes out now are the positive deposits that you've been making. Whereas before, it was the negative things that came out of maybe what was spoken to you or something that you've experienced.
Yeah, so that's it. So I interviewed Dr. David Spiegel from Stanford. And, they talk about the default mode network and they use that same analogy, right? And so it sounds like it's the practice. It's like you got to get your reps in, you got to get your at bats in, you got to get up and do it so that you can put it in there. You can put the positive messages back into that file. I noticed that I'll do public speaking for a while and I feel like the practice, I get real comfortable with it. But if I stop doing it for a while, like if there is a long period of time in between public speaking and I go back and do it again, like all that old anxiety, like my brain reverts back to that default. And so the
No,
work begins again.
yeah, that's real. And
Yeah.
what happens is once you kind of kick back into your mode, so again, it's the desktop versus the hard drive, right? It,
Right.
once you're doing the work, now you're pulling those files from the hard drive onto the desktop. And you do
Okay.
you do that assessment and you rewrite that behavior. But then that file that you've had now on the desktop, you don't use that file for a while, your operating system is still used to operating in this mode. So when
Yeah.
you kind of go back to it, your operating system goes one, boom, I'm going to need information from that file. And you go, no, we don't use that file
We
anymore.
don't use it.
This is how we're going to operate. This is how we're going to do this. And then you get that comfort back and you go, okay, I'm back in control. I got this. We can move.
The practice, it's a beautiful thing. I think that's so interesting. I know service is a big part of what you do, and I think that's a good way to stay in the practice, like people showing up in your community and sharing. It helps keep that information fresh.
Absolutely.
I feel like it acts as like, there's that idea that all the answers are within us, but we just sometimes need, like when we're in fear and our brain gets hijacked, it's like hard to remember what we know. And that's why we need each other. And I think that's like the beautiful thing about community and the beautiful thing about service is that when we're in service, we may or may not help somebody else, but it sure does help us stay, current on that information.
No, that's on point. So I have this thing that I teach people about living in love.
Mhm.
And the way that I explain it is, there are people that are consumers of love, right? And the way that they understand love is, hey, I need someone to love me. I need someone to give me love. I need someone to pour that on me. And that makes you a consumer. And that's fine if that's the role that you choose. And then there are people that are distributors of love,
Mhm.
right? And the consumer needs a distributor to be around in order for them to have a thing, right? And a consumer oftentimes can't, because of the way that they're operating with this thing. Speaking of love, they don't really have a connection directly to the manufacturer, the creator, right? Because they themselves as a consumer of it. But when you're a distributor of love, not only do you not have to wait for someone, but you always have it. And the analogy that I use is in kind of connection to the creator. When you're a distributor of love, you have a direct plug to the manufacturer, to the distributor. So if you're really good at distributing love, the manufacturer, the distributor is gonna, or the manufacturer is gonna go, I love your distribution network. I'm going to make sure you always have this product because of how great you are at distributing it. So the point that I drive by saying all that to people is, if you ever need to understand how to live a life of love and how to always have it, be someone that is constantly giving it.
Yeah.
That is how you're always experiencing love. That is how you become that person that understands, hey, I'm living my life in love and my life of love because I'm always looking for someone to love on. I'm always looking for someone to pour into. And to the point about kind of staying fresh in this process of healing is because I'm always out here trying to pour some healing and some love on someone. So a lot of the principles that we're talking, I'm constantly being reminded of it. I'm constantly speaking it. I'm constantly pouring it out of me, which means it's constantly flowing through me. So it's just one of those things. And again, how I ended up on TikTok in the state of grief, but still showing up to pour into people, to love on people. I saw how that instantly created an environment around me of love and support and healing. So it's just one of the practice that I tell people. If you want to live a life of love and you want to always feel that consistently, be a distributor, not just a consumer.
Not just a consumer. I feel like that's beautiful, by the way. I really love that because I really do believe that whatever we give comes back to us tenfold. And so whatever it is that you feel like you're lacking, that's exactly what you need to give, which seems counterintuitive kind of on the surface. It's like, how can I give something I don't have? But there's always love to give. Right?
And that so that's beautiful because that's where most people start with that question. Well, how can I give something I don't have? And the way that I kind of frame it for them is, wherever you get love from when you're not waiting for someone to give it to you, most people would say, hey, I know my creator is love. Well, does that supply ever run out? No.
Right.
The
Yeah.
only reason you don't have it right now is because you're in consumer mode,
Right.
whereas you're waiting to receive it. But
Yeah.
if you're in distribution mode, You don't need to, you don't have to go generate it somewhere. You have
Right.
it to give. You have a
Mhm.
positive word to say to someone. You have a positive, uplifting thing. Hey, you look great today. Hey, I love you today. That doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to go
Mhm.
find that anywhere. And if
Mhm.
you make that a foundation of your daily activity to do that, then you're always in that spirit, because one of the most powerful things that I know that is a part of doing this work is when I see that light come on in someone. It, it just, that's when I overflow,
Yeah.
right? When I see that light come on, when I meet that person, it may have been in a very low space or may have been with some low energy, and we're just having that conversation. I'm just pouring love on them, pouring a little bit of wisdom to them, and then that light goes on, and they
Oof.
get it, they understand it. To me, that's it right there, right?
Mhm.
That's the reason why we do what we do, and I think each of us are designed to do that. And that's how we keep the human whole, fresh. If each of us understood, my job is to be an aid to the cell that's next to me. If I can aid you and you understood that's your job, if we all became distributors of love, would there be a lack of it?
Yeah. And it's so, I love how practical your suggestions are. Like a simple, kind word, a simple text to somebody. Hey, just thought I'd check in on you. Who doesn't love receiving that text? Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, people don't always want it. I mean, don't just call me out of the blue because that's weird. But if you just want to send me a text and be like, hey, I was just thinking about you. What are you doing?
Yep.
My girlfriends and I use this app called Marco Polo. I don't know if you ever heard. It's a video chat app. And so I'll be on camera and I'll send a message to my girlfriend and she sends one. And so we chat when we can,
Yeah.
right? So it's still different than a live conversation. But just the simple act of I was thinking of you and I just wanted you to know. I hope you have a great day. Man, that's distribution right there. That's like
Absolutely.
anybody can do that.
Absolutely. And that's really, sometimes things are overcomplicated for us so that we miss it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
intentional, right? Especially when it comes to like how we treat each other.
Yeah.
It's overcomplicated by intent. It's supposed to be that way. When in
We're
reality,
overcomplicating it, right?
we're definitely overcomplicating it. No,
Yeah, like I'm raising my hand. I totally overcomplicate it.
because to your point, that those small acts, when that becomes a part of your character, because you've done it so much and you've disciplined yourself enough to do it so much that now it's a part of your character. That's when you're walking and living in abundance, right? Because now you're flowing with this thing every single day, and the energy that you're pouring into people, once their light comes on, they're waiting for an opportunity to pour that back into you. And if you kind of create a community of people around you where you're constantly pouring into them, and now when their light comes on, they're pouring into you. And now you have a community of people that are walking and flowing in this positive energy of love. And that's the goal.
That's the goal. Okay, that's the goal. I love that. And what I have found interesting, like we were going back to expectations a little bit. It doesn't always come from the people that I pour it into, but oftentimes it comes from like the community. Like I can pour into one person, but when I have a hard day and I'm sad or grieving or whatever, it comes back to me somewhere else. Like it may not come from the people I expect it to, but it comes.
Absolutely.
It
Absolutely.
comes.
Universal law.
Yeah. Ah, that's
Uni-
what I love about Source. Is Carolyn Mace wrote like The Spirit of Anatomy. She wrote a bunch of books and she was on Oprah and she gave the definition of God that I really took to heart, which was God is law, like the universal law of like karma, tithing, attraction, all that stuff, gravity, even. I'm a science girl at heart, but it's also personal. Like there is something benevolent that is like on my side, something powerful and loving that wants to see me at peace and experience joy and live a life of purpose. So I love those two together.
No, that's great. And one of the things that I also say to people is, we often talk about favor and prayer and, like you said, knowing that source, the creator, God, is on my side.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of the people that I encounter, that I do life coaching with and kind of teaching with, are people that find themselves deconstructing from the traditional ideas of religion,
Right.
but they're struggling to find the place where they still have a belief in the creator, but they're deconstructing from these traditional ideas of religion. And one of the things that I share with people is, if you if you think of it like this, a fair parent wouldn't go through a process of selecting between their children as to who has what or who I'm going to show favor to. What a fair parent would likely do is create systems within the home where any child that align with these systems, you have the blessings of this parent. And how that applies to us in creator is, if your foundation is love, source is love, the universal energy that governs everything in our ecosystem is governed by love, then if you align your life and yourself with love, then you have the favor of knowing that the creator is on your side. Because
Mhm.
now you're aligned with whatever it is that your benefits are to be by having the creator on your side. So you can't be misaligned with love and then think, oh, the creator's on my side just because I know all of the religious rituals, or I know all the religious jargon, or I know all of the books that I've read, so the creator's on my side. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't have it doesn't constitute or connect to anything that we know to be true. However, if in fact the requirement is, be aligned with who I am and what I am. And if we know the creator and source to be love, then if you're aligned with your creator in your actions, your thoughts, and your words are those of love, then you are favored. And the creator is on your side. And the beauty of that is each of us have the ability to do that. I don't need to be special to align myself with love. I don't need to come from a specific place. I don't need to be associated with a specific group of people. It does not matter. I and you and everyone else has the ability to align with source by simply aligning with what we know source to be, love. And in that way, that is the fairest distribution of the favor of the creator, which is, I'm not going to pick and choose. I'm just going to establish a system by which any of you that are my children that come from me can align with, to receive the favor that comes along with that.
Okay, I'm gonna put you to task a little bit because I have something I've been chewing on that I cannot work it out. And thank you so much for talking about deconstruction from a religious perspective. I kind of had some religious trauma growing up, and I love me some Jesus and the whole thing. But I don't like what a lot of the people are doing with that information. So I kind of get the ick around that.
Yeah.
But here's my struggle. Clearly you are aligned. I see that, you've had some stuff go viral, and you have this audience, and I'm like, I want to do that too. Right. And then I see in my world people who have, like, no, like in the recovery space, they don't have a lot of information. They haven't, just people that, and listen, I'm not trying to say that being sober for a couple of years or 5 years, whatever, that's an amazing accomplishment. But I look at myself, I do this comparison thing. I'm like, I've been sober for almost 30 years. Right. And I'm like, what is it about me? Maybe this is self-blame, or like, this all comes back to, I'm not good enough. It's like God's showing all this favor on these people who have these enormous audiences, and and I'm like, what am I doing wrong? Like, I can't seem to figure it out. And it's like this is one of my self-defeating patterns that I have. It's like, I want to help, I put myself out there, and then I don't see the kinds of results. I feel like I'm not resonating. I'm like, I don't know if I'm not being, like, there must be, I must be broken. not good enough. Like this is, and these are, and then it just creates like this frustration in me. And it's like, well, okay, well, I guess God doesn't want me to do this. But it feels like a dream on my heart that I want to express myself. Like my mission in life is to help alleviate unnecessary suffering. And when I'm working one-on-one with people, like I feel that magic that feels like the presence of love, right? And I'm like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. But there's a disconnect somewhere in my field. I suspect it's probably rooted in those fears of humiliation, rejection, not good enough. How do I resolve that so that I can have a bigger impact? That's really what I'm seeking, is a like I and I'm not saying that I'm not blessed. You know, I am so blessed that my husband and I have been together almost 30 years. He's the perfect husband for me. And, you know, whatever. So I have a lot of blessings. I'm not saying I'm not blessed, but I'm like, I want this one thing and it's not happening. And I just assume that I'm broken. So what do you make of all that mess? What am
But
I doing wrong?
no, that's pretty good, and it's common, right? We all have those similar experiences of expectation. That's where it starts, right?
Mm,
Because the comparison has to be based on an expectation. Because what else am I comparing it to? So, for instance, for most of us that are doing this work, because we want to have the largest impact that we can have and help so many people, we want our work to expand and go far. So
yeah.
part of our expectation comes out of our desire for how we see our gift to impact the world or to impact people. But those are our expectations, right? And it doesn't mean it will or it won't happen. But I think the first place to start is what are once I know my intent is to genuinely help people. Once I know that, and I can really do that assessment within myself and say, hey, Kohn, what is it that you ultimately want? And for me, it became, I want my life and my purpose to align in that every day I can pour life, love, and wisdom into people in a way that would help them overcome any struggles and all of those things. But not just that, but to help them to thrive. Okay, if I do that for 5 people, and I only do that for 5 people a month, I'm fulfilling that purpose. Where the disappointment may come is because I'm now setting an expectation for myself
Mhm.
that it may align with my purpose, but it's beyond what the core of the purpose is. That's to help people. So if I'm helping 5 people a week or 5 people a month, I'm doing what I'm designed to be doing, right? And what happens is if I set these expectations based on what I want, because I want to see myself do this because I believe I can. If I set those expectations and I'm not willing to ride it out until I don't have another breath in my body, then I create this cycle of momentary disappointment for myself. So
Mhm.
here's what I will give you, and this is something that I give people all the time. One of my war battle affirmations is this: as long as I have breath in my body, right? And what that means is if I'm still breathing, whatever it is that I desire or whatever goal it is in front of me, I don't define that as over because I'm still breathing. So whatever goals that I've set for myself, my cutoff point of when I give up is when I no longer have breath in my body. What that does for you, and I'm sure you had the 369 journal, Understanding Manifestation. In the process of manifestation, what makes it possible, we all manifest. We manifest every single day. And I've
Yeah.
got a couple of videos on that. It's not some art form. The teaching of manifestation is really someone teaching you how to focus with intent to manifest what you desire. Many of us are manifesting the life, all of us are manifesting the life that we're living, either with or without intent. But the way that this vessel was designed and created, it's created to manifest. What
Mm,
we teach people is how to focus with intent what you want to manifest so you can manifest
yes.
it. But in thinking about manifestation, right? And why that battle line of as long as I have breath in my body, what happens is there's no stopping point where I don't expect this to come to pass. There's
Mm,
no point where I stop giving all of my efforts believing that it's going to happen because I still have breath in my body. And that is the bottom line for me. So if I wake up tomorrow and there's only 5 people listening, I still expect this message to reach the masses. Why? I still have breath in my body. That belief and that understanding is how you hold on to the energy necessary with a keen focus in knowing that this is going to happen, that you manifest it, right? And the
yeah.
work part of the manifestation is aligning my thoughts, my words, and my actions with that which I desire. And sometimes we have the thoughts, oh, I want to get this thing, right? We have the words, we speak that we can do it, but then sometimes our actions are not consistently aligning with what we actually want to manifest,
Yeah.
right? So those 3 things have to align with this belief that it's going to happen no matter what, but I've got to do my part.
Yeah. And I can see, okay, I'm connecting the dots as to why the journal is so important because when you said consistency, like that's one of my weaker areas. Like I often work off of like inspiration, but inspiration can be fleeting, right? If it's not intentional. And so I could like when you're talking about consistency, I go, why am I not consistent? And I think it goes back to like when I this is like where my pattern is like I get afraid, so I play small, I don't do the actions, I don't see the results, and then I go, see, this is maybe I'm not meant to do this.
It's self, it's, and watch this. This is beautiful, right? That's the manifesting that I'm talking about unintentionally.
It's like that self-fulfilling prophecy thing that they talk about.
That's the manifesting that's happening
Yeah.
unintentionally, right? Where
Unintentional.
that process is manifesting what you're seeing in front of you,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Now, if you tweak that process and identify, okay, it's me being afraid, me playing small. So let me stop and check these 2 areas right here. Whenever I feel afraid, I'm going to identify what am I afraid of? And
Okay.
then once I identify that, instead of making myself small now, I'm going to speak this life into myself. I'm going to speak this encouragement into myself, and then I'm going to push myself forward, right? Because now your thoughts, your words, and now your actions are aligning with what you desire. And then
Mm,
that's how you break that cycle of keep manifesting that which you don't desire. So I'll give you another
yeah.
example.
So good.
I explain to people that if anxiety is the expectation of something going wrong in overdrive,
Mhm.
right? That's where anxiety comes from. Then faith is the expectation of the right outcome in overdrive. If you're able to hold on to the feeling of anxiety and laser focus on what you're anxious about to a point where you can produce in your life the very thing that you're anxious about, then in the same way, if you're able to hold on to the feeling of faith with laser focus into what you desire for yourself, you're also able to produce in your life that which you're holding that feeling of faith towards. The work part where it says faith without works is
Works
dead
is
and
good.
not religion, that's across the board, is you can have the belief that it will happen, but it requires you to do the thing that is necessary. And then through you doing it, believing it, focusing on it, and never letting go, because our foundation is as long as I've got breath in my body, through that process, you'll always manifest what you desire.
Oh my God, that is so powerful. I'm so glad I have this recorded because I'm gonna have to listen to this a few times. And it all makes sense. You know, there's a lot of concern about spiritual bypassing, right? Oh, I'm just going to focus. But that's actually not what you're doing. Because my whole thing has always been, you know, people, when they're upset about something, their feelings need to be validated first. until we can move to the solution. And that's exactly what you're saying in this process. I feel the anxiety. What is this about? So validating. This is real. This feeling is real. It came from here. How do we reframe it? And so it's still validating. And I really feel like that's a key component to processing feelings to resolution, is validating them. People come to me and they come to me with their pain, and I'm like, of course you feel sad. Of course you feel grief. Of course you feel. And sometimes that acknowledgement, like being seen, heard, and understood, the things that I always wanted, like
Yep.
that's why I always give it, right? Because that's what I always craved when I was young,
Yep.
was to be seen, heard, and understood. So I just wanted to highlight that because a lot of people, I think, misunderstand what manifestation is about. I heard somebody saying, "Oh, it's victim blaming." I'm not buying into it, and I was like, I don't think that that's how it works, because you're actually acknowledging and validating, but then the work is to be conscious and intentional. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And even to that regard, that's really how I approach teaching shadow work. Is shadow work is not about identifying who hurt you, right? You'll see that in the process, but in identifying and really seeing, okay, here's the root of my pain, here's who was there that caused my pain. One of the first things that we teach is that person, whether they deserve it, whether they want it, or whether they're even aware, they forgive them, because it's not even, your forgiveness isn't even about them. It's about you, because that unforgiveness is going
Mm.
to hinder your process of healing. So it's not about identifying who hurt you. It's not about identifying what your hurt is. You're only doing that work to go, oh, that's what I need to rework. That's what I need to reframe. And ultimately, what we're teaching people is to take the accountability for what your life is today and take the pen to author what you want your life to be tomorrow. Because so often, for many of us that have been through trauma or been through these experiences, our lives are the result of those experiences. And we haven't taken a moment to go, I have the pen of my life. I can write what my life is going to be, no matter how traumatic those experiences were. Those experiences do not have to dictate the quality of my life or the outcome of my life. And that's the empowering part that we're teaching and giving people is, hey, you can do this. No matter what you've been through, no matter what you've experienced. Yes, you've been through it. Yes, it was tough. But guess what? Today, right now, you have the ability to re-author and take ownership of your life for what is going to be today and what is going to be for the rest of your life.
Oh, that's beautiful. That is so beautiful. And it's said with, I could feel your compassion and empathy, right? Like I work with people in addiction, and I tell them it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility.
Mm, that's
Right.
good.
And as you were talking, it also, the other reason to forgive, they say that all forgiveness is self-forgiveness. And I kind of live by this idea that people are mirrors. They just are reflecting back to us what we love or we hate about ourselves, right? And you can't escape the measuring stick that you judge others by. So, and that's what really the shadow work is. It's the disowned, abandoned, rejected parts of ourselves. And I like get that here intellectually, and sometimes it's hard to get down into my heart. But I was taught that you can't escape the same measuring stick that you judge others by. So if somebody made a mistake and hurt you, and you condemn them, that means when you make a mistake, you condemn yourself. Right. And so I just boil it all down to, if you spot it, you got it. It's
No,
like
that's good.
if you spot self-centeredness, selfishness, it's like, yeah, you also have it. And the antidote is self-compassion.
No, absolutely. And the self-compassion, right? It oftentimes this is what we find happening with people. The reason we lack compassion for other people is because we lack it for ourselves.
Amen.
When you understand that ability to be compassionate,
Yeah.
to love yourself, you project it. You project it, you reflect it, it
Yeah.
becomes a part of just who you are. So a lot of times, to the point that you were making, when we see those behaviors in people that is just harsh towards other people, and I went through that, right? I was harshly criticized as a kid. So
Mm.
I developed this harsh criticism of myself. And then I found that I was very harshly critical of the people around me. I would put these expectations on them to be perfect because I had this need to be perfect so that I wouldn't fulfill what was spoken into my life.
Wow.
Once I recognized that and I started to go, "Con, you're fine.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay if you don't get that right, as long as you gave a good, solid effort." And once I started showing myself that compassion, it became so much easier to accept other people's flaws and accept other people's mistakes. And that's when I really started to understand on a personal level, oh, the things you do to other people oftentimes is what you do to yourself or what was done to you.
Oh
So,
my God. Yeah. So I have a son that's a lot like me, and I found myself being really critical. Like I was harder on him than my other son.
mm,
It's because he was me, and that's how I was treated, right? That's what love felt like in my house growing up, was like I had a critical parent. And
yeah,
so in raising my son who looked and acted just like me, like personality wise, I found myself harder on him because that's how I treat myself. And
absolutely.
it's like, that's not how I want to be. I want to be the loving, nurturing parent
No, you're
with
absolutely on.
boundaries.
But no, it's to that point, things that I always say why it's so important to do shadow work is
Yeah.
especially for parents, especially
Oh,
for, I mean, you can literally, and that's why I say too now, when you go back and visit those memories that you're trying to work on and that you know were associated with your trauma, go back as an observer.
okay.
Because what you will find is that when you're observing, especially if you're a parent now, and you observe the way you were treated as a child, if you're willing to be honest, you'll see the direct line between the way they treated you and the way you're now treating your children. And this happens in two regards. One is you were treated that way and you feel like you survived, or it made you strong, or it made you all these things that you
Mhm.
need positive. So now you're going to treat your children that way. Or the second regard is I was treated this way, so I'm going to go to the extreme opposite and do that for my children, even though that extreme opposite may not be what is best for your children.
Yeah.
So the way that I frame that for people is you're parenting out of your trauma, and that's not in your children's best interest.
Oh my God. That's so rude. Call me out like that. My friend calls that spiritual rudeness.
Not you, not you. Who we
Yes,
talking?
me. Yes, me. Yes, me. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. Um, I've kept you longer than I said I would, but I love the work that you're doing. How can people, you do coaching and stuff. If someone wants to work one-on-one with you, what's the best way to reach out to you for like one-on-one coaching or group coaching?
Yeah, so you can email me at girldadsos at gmail.com. That's girldadsos at gmail.com. You can also go check out our website, which is girldadllc.com. That's where you'll find like
The
our,
journals and
yeah, yeah, that's more of our long-term goals of what we're doing and some of the things that we have in the works. Um, Girl Dad LLC is a company that I've built around my daughter and I. So
yeah.
primarily what we're doing is developing entertainment for children and for families to really highlight not just the joys of parenting and the joys of families, but to create content that allows parents to have some of those more difficult conversations with their kids through this content. So a lot of the things that we use children's stories to address tougher issues,
Mhm.
but through this story that you can read with your kid, it also gives you an opportunity to now have a conversation about a really tough issue. So, for example, one of the books that we're developing is a book about losing loved ones. because at some point, um, I'm going to have that conversation with my daughter about her brother, who's my son that passed.
Yeah.
And I mean, she's a really special child and she's very in tune with things that are much beyond her years. So it's going to
Mhm.
be easier for us because she even speaks about her brother as, oh, he's always going to be with me and I know he loves me and all. So she has a concept of it now, but I imagine that there are other parents that may find it difficult to have those types of conversations. So we
Yeah.
create children's stories that are enjoyable and digestible for a child, but it
Mhm.
just broaches the topic enough so that a parent can actually have the conversation. So that's
That's
also what we
beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, and I love how you do so every Sunday at 3:33 you also do the live YouTube. Some of those are long. I was like, you are in your zone of genius because 4 hours. I was like, that's a little intimidating. But you
yeah,
have a bunch of recordings already. So if people want to dive into your catalog of content, super deep, really impactful.
yep, and that's every Sunday, 3:33 p.m. Eastern. Um,
Eastern. Okay.
and that all started out of a teaching series that I was doing called Sunday Serving. And
Okay.
started with some just spiritual teaching, creating spaces for people to really heal and really just kind of come together and start to build the community. And then
Yeah.
once we discovered the Shadow Work Journal and started building a community of people that wanted to really use this as a tool on their healing journey, I started to focus the conversation on digging into some of the reflection questions and giving that additional guidance and insight on
Yeah.
how to do the work.
Yeah, listen, you have such a gift. And thank you so much for, your free coaching for me today.
You're very, you're very
No,
welcome.
you really have a gift, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. I really feel like this is really up for me. So I'm going to be diving deep into the shadow work journal. But I just want to thank you so much for your time and for all that you do. And I'll look forward to talking with you again real soon.
Absolutely. And before I go, I'll leave the audience and you with two things that I always tell people. One thing is love yourself like no one else can. And the second thing is love yourself the way that you expected them to, and love yourself in the way that they may have failed to.
Oh, that's big. That's awesome. Thank you
Appreciate
so
for the opportunity.
Thanks.
All right, have a good one.